We're going to take a look at three Supreme Court cases from the industrial era, all of which involve the railroads. The first case is Munn versus Illinois, which was decided in 1877. Munn was the operator of grain elevators, three of which you can see here. Not that these were necessarily Munn's. Grain elevator companies charged farmers for storing their grain prior to putting it onto railroads. And they were able to set their own prices, but in fact they operated very much like monopolies in these farm communities, so they charged prices that were fairly high. Farmers were looking for some relief, and the state of Illinois in fact stepped in and forced grain elevator companies to lower their prices. Munn is going to sue, and the issue for the Supreme Court, you see here, is whether the regulation of railroad rates by the state of Illinois deprived the railroad companies of property without due process of law under the 14th Amendment. The decision, in a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court's going to uphold the Illinois law because the movement and storage of grain were considered to be closely related to the public interest. All right, therefore, state legislatures could step in to set rates. So this is going to be a victory for the state of Illinois, and by extension, a victory for the farmers. It will, however, be a short-lived victory, bringing us to our second case, which is the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific Railway versus, again, the state of Illinois. This case was decided in 1886, and it involves the state of Illinois. I'll make this larger. I highlighted the state of Illinois in yellow. The Wabash Railway system is shown in red here on the map. At issue here are railroad rates on an interstate trip that may have started in Illinois but ended over here in New York. And what was happening was that the Wabash Railway Company, and perhaps other railroads as well, were charging more money from eastern Illinois to New York than they were from larger communities in western Illinois, again to New York, even though the distance from western Illinois to New York was further. So the state of Illinois stepped in to regulate the railroad rates and impose a penalty on railroads that charged the same or more money for passengers or freight shipped for shorter distances than for longer distances on an interstate trip. So what they were doing was regulating the Illinois portion of the interstate trip. So the Wabash Railroad Company sued, and the issue for the Supreme Court to decide was whether or not a state government has the power to regulate railroad prices on the in-state portion of an interstate journey. This time the Supreme Court's going to decide in favor of the railroads simply because the Constitution makes very clear that Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. Since this was obviously an interstate trip, only the federal government had the ability to regulate any portion of that trip. So the Illinois statute is going to be struck down. This is also going to affect the Munn case, though. That grain that was sitting in those grain elevators in the Munn case was destined for another state, probably on the East Coast somewhere. So this case is going to have an impact on Munn as well. The last case that we're going to look at today involves the Pullman Railway Strike of 1894. You're looking at Eugene V. Debs, one of the leaders of the American Railway Union that led the railway strike. And here you have workers walking off the job at the Pullman Railway factory. What happened was the federal government, through the courts, ordered Debs and the other leaders to order the strikers to go back to work. So the federal government was forcing the workers to go back to work. Eugene V. Debs refused to order his workers to go back to work, and he was placed in jail. So the issue before the Supreme Court was whether or not the federal government has the constitutional authority to stop railroad workers from striking. Remember, this is private company. The railroads were privately owned. They were not government owned. So does the federal government have the authority to step in here? And the court is going to decide overwhelmingly, yes, they do. The argument that the court makes, it says here, the court reasoned that the federal government has enumerated powers found in Article 1, Section 8 to regulate commerce among the several states, as well as to establish post offices and post roads. Those are powers of Congress. When the railway union struck, it interfered with the railroad's ability to carry on commerce and deliver the mail, which benefited the needs and general welfare of all Americans. Promoting the general welfare is in the preamble to the Constitution. So the court pulled from several sections of the Constitution to make the argument that the federal government could step in and order railway workers to go back to work. So then, to sum up, Munn versus Illinois was a short-lived victory for farmers, which was then superseded by the Wabash, St. Louis and Pacific Railway versus Illinois case, which strengthened congressional control over interstate commerce. And then lastly, in the In re Debs case, that explained how the government has the power to eliminate basically any roadblock to interstate commerce, even though the companies involved in interstate commerce are private companies. In the case of the railway strike, then, the government did have the constitutional authority to order the workers, striking workers, to go back to work.